Hey guys, Pieguyrulz here, and welcome to a Spongy Bits list, where I take some episodes from my big SpongeBob review series, put them together based on some sort of theme, and elaborate further on my reviews. This time, I'm talking about the infamous 83 trilogy. 3 episodes that aired under one production number that all turned out to be scumbobs. This was the only instance of it happening in Season 5 or any other season of SpongeBob, and unless the show goes back to doing a 3-short format occasionally, this will likely be the only example of it ever happening. Aside from sharing a production number, all 3 of these are incredibly boring and humorless. From Patrick's boring, tedious, and obnoxiously loud morning routine, to SpongeBob standing around not doing anything, to an episode that for some reason takes itself extremely seriously, when in fact it is incredibly stupid. Alright, first up, Patrick's Tale. Episode 83A, Rise and Shine. Patrick has an interesting morning. This is the first of our shorts for the season, and the 4th overall behind Help Wanted, Reef Blower, and Gary Takes a Bath. So this episode is the first episode that really stars Patrick on his own. You have episodes like Patrick's Smart Pants and Rule of Dumb that are from his perspective mostly, but in those episodes he has SpongeBob and other characters to bounce off of. This is the first episode where he is primarily by himself, and he proves that this is a terrible, terrible idea. Because apparently the only jokes you can tell with Patrick is that, he's stupid. And that's pretty much all this episode is. Patrick being stupid in the morning set to the wonderful tune of an alarm clock going on throughout the entire short. And that's what really gets me. Without the alarm clock, this episode would have just been pointless and kind of dull, probably gotten a meh. But the fact that the alarm clock goes on throughout the entire thing, like a constant ringing in your ears of how stupid this all is, it just really pushes an already tedious 4 minutes right into the depths of scumbag. The only thing I kinda like is how Patrick actually ends up getting ready, but it's a really short sequence and it's not that great. The worst part of this episode, by far, is the alarm. And I was exaggerating a little in the review. I would say it happens during 3 of the 4 minutes, which is still quite a lot to hear that ringing. They couldn't have chosen a sound that was a little bit more pleasing to the ear, or, I don't know, just have not had that segment drag on for so long. And that actually brings me to my other point, what I didn't say in the initial review. The reason why I hate so many of these Patrick is stupid gags is that it takes him forever to do anything. It's not that he does something in an incredibly stupid way, it's that he stands there and stares at objects and tries to think of what to do with them at an incredibly slow pace. I know this thing is a short, but most of the running time is spent having Patrick do only 2 things. Try and figure out a way to stop the noise, and figure out how to feed himself. Unfortunately, it doesn't involve any funnels. Such highlights include Patrick trying to coax his food out of the can and onto a plate for 20 seconds just by saying, "Come on, can, come on food, you can do this." It's like watching a game show where you figure out the answer before the contestants do. You're just sitting there screaming at your screen, "Come on, the answer is this. We get it. Patrick doesn't know how to open food. Can we just please move on, or at least have Patrick do something that's somewhat amusing?" Patrick's actions move way too slow, so the comedic timing is way off. When you only have 4 minutes to wow me, why would you want to show me this long of a sequence of Patrick talking to a can? And the thing with the whole character being stupid or ignorant gag is that it mostly only works when there's other characters around to acknowledge how stupid the one character is and get frustrated with them. It's funny to see a character get mad at another character's stupidity, but when there's only Patrick in most of this episode, we don't get that reaction from a character. So if you don't find the fact that he's just a moron who doesn't understand life to be funny, there's nothing else here for you. If you don't believe me, think back to Band Geeks. Patrick asking if mayonnaise is an instrument is only funny because of Squidward's deadpan reaction to it. Sure, Patrick does the setup, but Squidward is really the crux of the joke. If Patrick had asked if mayonnaise was an instrument and an idiot up on stage says, "Yeah, you better believe it is," that's not funny, that's just people who don't understand how the world works. Heck, if you want a meta example, which is funnier? Watching SpongeBob episodes that are incredibly stupid, or watching me react to SpongeBob episodes that are incredibly stupid? And And speaking of which, since no one is in the episode to react to Patrick's stupidity, I'm the only one that gets frustrated. And maybe I am the only one. I don't know. But what I do know is that I don't like this episode. However, it is a lot better than the other two offerings in the trilogy. It's like a warm-up act. It's still bad, but it's nowhere near as horrendous and just uninteresting as what's to come. And speaking of which... Oh, sorry, did I keep you...
waiting? SpongeBob waits for a toy to come in the mail. This short is honestly one of the most infuriating things I have ever seen. It checks off the boxes on everything that makes a SpongeBob episode bad, outside of maybe some gross out thing. It has SpongeBob laughing excessively. It has SpongeBob acting like a jerk to Sandy and Patrick. It has SpongeBob crying excessively. It has things that don't make sense, like apparently SpongeBob missed his surprise birthday party that happened 5 seconds off screen, and obvious jokes like Patrick eating the cake. It has the fact that the episode just barely even bothers with the plot or any sort of gags. This thing is awful on so many levels, and it's a short. I never thought a short episode could possibly make me so frustrated and angry, but it does. You don't want to watch it. You never want to see this episode come on. It is so tedious and boring and annoying and frustrating. The best part of the episode is the fact that Squidward appears in it, and nothing horrible and unfair happens to him. Aside from having to put up with SpongeBob, of course. That's the highlight, the fact that something didn't happen. That's pretty bad.
Do I even need to say it's a
scumbag? The entire episode can just be summed up as SpongeBob refuses to have a plot. He literally stands there waiting for this toy, and anytime something remotely interesting seems like it's gonna happen, like Patrick comes up to him and tries to start a plot, SpongeBob just absolutely denies it. It's just a really bad episode on multiple accounts, and I'm pretty sure the only reason that nothing disgusting happens here is because they were saving it all up for the very next episode.
Wow, this episode is somehow even worse than I remember it. I think if anything, I went too easy on it in my first review. This episode is just... ugh. So in addition to the crying and the laughing, there's also a lot of screaming, which is not very pleasant. Sandy's part is also particularly frustrating because it's one of the few times you actually get to see karate post-movie, and yet it's just instantly shut down. And speaking of SpongeBob's behavior to the other characters, it comes out of nowhere how rude he is to them. It goes from SpongeBob being happy-go-lucky to just jerky, angry SpongeBob in no time at all. Now, you could understand this if he'd been waiting there for a very long time, but they do not do a good job of showing that if that's what is supposed to have happened. I know that it's a short, and trust me, I didn't want to see extended periods of SpongeBob just standing there, but you could have done something to make it feel a little more justified and earned that SpongeBob would snap like this. Because when his behavior isn't justified, you're going to be annoyed by him. Oh, and this is a little thing, but it bugs me nonetheless. There's a button on the front of the toy that looks like it should be used to either dismantle the thing or fix the thing after it's been broken, quote unquote, and yet no one ends up actually pressing it. That's not how Squid puts it back together, and that's not how it breaks. I'm pretty sure that there was some sort of disconnect between the writers and the animators on this one, because it seems like the obvious reason as to why the button would be there. Outside of the gag where Patrick eats SpongeBob's cake, there isn't much humor either. And if you really want to dissect the story, after SpongeBob mails away his box tops, he literally does nothing but yell at his friends. He doesn't even solve the problem at the end of the episode. That's Squidward that does that. Our hero does almost nothing in this episode but complain and be a jerk. It's pretty clear that with some of these shorts, the writers just didn't put too much thought or effort into them. Hey, let's have SpongeBob do a cereal box top plot. And then, SpongeBob stands by his mailbox, and Patrick comes and tries to get him to do stuff, but SpongeBob won't leave the mailbox, and then Patrick breaks the toy, but it's not actually broken, and Squidward fixes it. Yeah, there we go. Episode written. Send it to Korea! I really cannot adequately explain how extensively and excruciatingly this episode gets on my nerves. There is seriously very little that actually happens in the episode, both comedy-wise and plot-wise. The idea of SpongeBob waiting by his mailbox all day and ignoring everyone else and everything else could have been an interesting one, but you definitely have to be very careful about how you portray this sort of thing so it doesn't come off as really boring to the audience. I mean, this is the show that managed to make a whole episode out of procrastinating, but of course, things actually happen in that episode, although some of them are a dream sequence. And you know something? That episode actually also features the male fish. I'm gonna go ahead and blame the Illuminati for this one. And now, to finish our trilogy with an episode that was so bad that I decided to model Season 5's Scum after it.
Episode 83C, Fungus Among Us. A disgusting fungus covers SpongeBob and Bikini Bottom. Yeah. This is, in my opinion, the first true, full-on gross-out episode. That's all the entirety of the episode is. People eating disgusting fungus, people scratching disgusting fungus, SpongeBob getting mutilated by this disgusting fungus. That's all it is. It's enough to make you really itchy. And there's nothing even close to any sort of jokes being told unless you think this disgustingness throughout the entire episode, this complete lack of understanding of how the gross out works on this show is funny. If you think this is funny, then fine, you must think this episode is hilarious. But for the rest of us, this episode is just skin-crawlingly disgusting and mean-spirited. Poor SpongeBob, I feel really bad for him in this episode. They go way too far with the SWAT team and all that stuff. The way he's hooked up to all those machines, it's just really disturbing. And not in any sort of good way. The plot structure feels a lot like Once Bitten with the foreshadowing in Gary early on, except instead of it being a fake epidemic, this time it's real and really gross. Also, unlike that episode, Mr. Krabs somehow ends up on top. I don't know why they felt the need to throw that in at the end, seeing as he really didn't have too much to do with the episode. They just had to throw one more stupid moment at the end of the episode. Oh, and the entire thing's really inconsistent. Sometimes the characters can see the scum, other times they can't, no matter how obvious it is. I think there may have been a miscommunication between the animators and the writers, because Squidward acts as if SpongeBob has a skin disease, but really, it's just scum on the top of his body, right? It's not actually a part of his skin. I mean, you'd notice that if that was actually his skin, and Squidward somehow notices this as soon as he sees SpongeBob's disease-covered nose and not the rest of his body that's disease-covered, and yet he doesn't also notice all of the scum he spread all over the patties and all of the customers. It's really weird and inconsistent in a really stupid way. This is what happens when the writers decide to disgust instead of amuse. There is no edge of satire to any of this. There's no comedy anywhere to be seen. It's just disgusting all the time. And perhaps the most appropriate episode to be called a SpongeBob episode.
And since the episode isn't funny at all, or even really trying to be, I can only assume it was trying to go for a more serious story. This has a very, very crucial flaw in it. None of the characters actually do anything to stop the problem. Outside of Squidward calling the SWAT team and Gary eating away the fungus at the very end, no one really does anything in this episode. Oh, and speaking of Gary, how did he get free? Last I saw him in this episode, he was trapped in a bubble like SpongeBob, but unlike SpongeBob, his bubble didn't burst. So how is it that he somehow ends up at the Krusty Krab later on? It really does seem like the entire point of this episode was to gross people out. There's no comedic angle to any of these characters eating this gross scum. Everyone is just horrified, and they make stupid decisions too. Like, why exactly are they trying to pop SpongeBob's bubble? Revenge or not, that's just stupid. Oh, and the guy with the foreign accent? For one of his lines, his accent conspicuously changes to a different foreign accent. And there really is something truly unsettling about seeing SpongeBob being consumed by this fungus. It's like seeing our lovable hero dying of some sort of creepy fungal disease. Unless it was used as a particularly dramatic moment in a somewhat serious and well-told story, nobody wants to see SpongeBob in that kind of discomfort and possible pain. And that's the thing. I'm perfectly fine with our main character being tortured and punished and all sorts of dark and gross things happening to characters in the episode if it's going to be a good and entertaining story. If it's not an entertaining story and it's not funny, then it's just a series of bad, unpleasant things happening. Don't get me wrong, the scum isn't so disgusting that I'm like puking or anything, but it's unpleasant to watch. I'm watching this to make me feel happy. I'm not watching this to feel grossed out. It's not a story, it's not a comedy, it's not even super gross like The Splinter. It's just kind of unpleasant. But I'll tell you something. It didn't make me quite as angry as Waiting made me. However, this was longer than Waiting, and the entire tone of this thing was just completely off of what a SpongeBob episode should be. So that's why I consider this one to be just a little bit worse. But if you look at my worst episodes of the season, they come pretty close to each other, and they are both near the very bottom. And that was the infamous 83 trilogy. 3 episodes that just suck. This is a pretty low point for the series. Pieguyrulz out.